On that day, the one who woke up in the palace was not Yoon Gap. His gaze, tone, expression, everything had changed. It was the eyes of a mythical creature that had waited 1,000 years. Not those of a human with memories. We are currently witnessing the scene of another being awakening within a human body. Gung is a fantasy palace romance drama. Airing on SBS in 2025, this content is based on a created universe and is a work of fiction unrelated to historical facts. The center of the story is the two people, Gangcheol, a legendary creature that has waited 1,000 years, residing in the body of a human named Yoon Gap, and before the shamaness who rejected her fragile fate, Yoon Gap was changing. Yook Sung-chae, who plays the lead role and has shown impressive acting in dramas like And, while Kim Ji-yeon is an actress who has added stability to Korean historical drama through And. His name is Yoon Gap. He was born as a half-blood and had been silently living within the confines of the social status predetermined by the world. Yet he became the king's chief secretary. He was someone who read books, gathered thoughts, and moved the king by writing those thoughts down. He did not wield a weapon. He held a brush instead of a sword and followed conviction instead of power. The petition he wrote directly shook the vested interests. He quietly yet clearly the irrationality of the military and the inhumanity of the slave system. People were whispering, "How dare you submit a petition on the subject of the half-blood? What does a mere lowly position know?" However, the king embraced him and acknowledged his intelligence. His name quickly became known within the palace and he became a more threatening presence than anyone else. That was Yoon Gap. However, that Yoon Gap suddenly died. There was no body, it just disappeared. A few days later he returned. But everything had changed. The gaze was unfamiliar. The tone was strange. He disregarded etiquette and brought a shaman to the palace. He was no longer the Gap of that time. People were afraid. Even the king was watching him, and every single one of his actions was suspicious. He was the evil god who waited 1,000 years. The image that could not become a dragon. He was Steel. Steel hated humans. It was humans who wounded him and shattered a millennium of training right before his eyes. Which is why Steel said that, "I do not understand beings like humans." Even so, he was feeling emotions inside Yoon Gap's body. It's something I've never felt before. The excitement of feeling it for the first time made him uncomfortable, and at some point he became confused. Why? The reason is that in front of her, the only human who resisted the Steel, who did not accept the shaman, who rejected her fate, the Steel stuttered. He avoided eye contact and remained silent. And he thinks, what kind of emotion is this? Am I becoming a person? Gangcheol is now seeing Yoon Gap's emotions, and instinctively protecting what Yoon Gap wanted to preserve. This is exactly the scene we are witnessing right now. Within a human body, another being is awakening. This is the beginning of Gung. Yoon Gap was a quiet person. He always kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and chose silence over speaking. His words were brief, but his thoughts were profound. Even when emotions were in turmoil, I never raised my voice. Such a temperament appeared as extraordinary to many. It was the same even in front of the king. He always knelt down and showed great respect. Whenever he spoke, his words were always backed by clear evidence and responsibility. But after he came back to life, something had completely changed. That change was first revealed in the words that had not been used before popped out, and directness emerged instead of etiquette. That's not my way. It's not about obeying orders I choose. That wasn't Yoon Gap's way of speaking. That was Steel. Even his walk has changed. In the past, a person who walked quietly on tiptoe was now confidently walking inside the palace. The gaze was even more striking. Yoon Gap, who used to avoid looking people in the eye, was now commanding and fighting with his eyes. Still did not look at people. He was piercing through his opponent. He was a threat without words, and he became a power without words. And everyone except the king noticed that change. But no one said anything. It was because they weren't sure if it was Yoon Gap or not. The first time Gangcheol revealed his true identity was during the shaman entrance when the military officer blocked Yeori from entering the palace. He said something that the old Yoon Gap would never have said. "If I say I will let you in, who can stop me?" And Yoon Gap was always a person who bowed his head before that absolute. But now that man has begun to openly disregard the king's orders and speak the existence of gods. And the moment he faces Yeori again becomes still like confused. When he first encountered Yeori, he tried to ignore her and forcefully control her. But Yeori saw right through him. The being inside him realized that he was not Yoon Gap for anyone else. And then Gangcheol started to stutter in front of her. They avoided eye contact, but somewhere they were shaken and were clearly angry. Why is that? It's because the steel was feeling emotions. The excitement of experiencing something for the first time. The first time his human weakness left him confused. Anger and sadness were mixed, and while he wanted to dominate, a desire to protect arose. Is it because of Yoon Gap's memories? Or was it the first emotion felt on his own? Now we can no longer separate Yoon Gap. His body belongs to Yoon Gap, but his heart belongs to both. And at the center of all these changes is Yeori. She knows. But she doesn't say that. He is not Yoon Gap. Because the current him is more human than before. What we are seeing now is not the death of a being, the birth of an existence. Steel waited for 1,000 years. In the long darkness, I endured, regretting just one mistake. I just wanted to become a dragon. I wanted to soar through the sky, become a god, and no longer close my eyes beneath the humans. However, a single child brought all of that crashing down. Since that day, he became a demon, filled with desire, a being more cruel than humans. Shook the village with drought and flood, pouring its anger over the cries of the people. He hated humans. Human greed, selfishness, lies, all of it was disgusting and unpleasant. So, it was a natural choice to take possession of Yoon Gap's body. Within that body was the king's trust, and through that body, he could move the palace and finally get closer to Yeori. So he went in. I literally infiltrated into Yoon Gap's body. However, that was not. It was another trap. The still will soon find out. At first, I didn't believe that. I couldn't escape from that body. It's about realizing that I have become trapped in a trivial human body. He became increasingly anxious. Inside it, something remained. It was a memory. Yoon Gap's memory. The book he was reading, the world he was looking at, he wanted to protect. Even the feelings he had remained just as they were. At first, I tried to ignore it. It's just data, merely a trace of a human that has already vanished. But that memory was not just the past. That memory shook him, cracked his anger, and blurred his goals. And she was yet another crack. The still tried to overpower her with fear. But she was not afraid. On the contrary, she saw right through him. You are not Yoon Gap. That one word shook my heart of steel. Why? Why does that word hurt? Still felt fear for the first time. The moment she recognized him, he realized that he was no longer pure evil. He was changing. From the moment he tried to dominate humans, he was rather being dominated by human emotions. He mutters to himself. Why? Can't I leave this body? Why does this emotion not stop? He thought he had taken Yoon Gap's body. But now, In reverse,
by Yoon Gap's
he was
soul.
gradually being colored. He had a body, but he lost his mind. He was a demon, but now he is crying like a human. He believed in himself. They say he is stronger than anything in the world. But now the thing that has made him the weakest is, in fact, emotion. And the beginning of that feeling was delicate. Every time she smiled, strangely ached, and every time she looked away, oddly enough, he became anxious. He says, "I am steel." But is it really? What we are seeing now may not be a scene where steel dominates Yoon Gap, but rather a scene where Yoon Gap's soul embraces steel. Who is encroaching on whom? Now, it's time for the viewers. Gangcheol thought that he borrowed Yoon Gap's body to ascend. He believed it was merely a tool to subdue Yeori, break the palace's taboos, and become a dragon again. However, that body was heavier than he expected. The memories left by Yoon Gap, the gaze of Yeori, the guilt, and compassion that Yoon Gap felt. Those emotions. In the preview for episode 3
we see
of
that
Dying
Yeori's
Steel,
gaze has changed.
She is no longer confused. She has realized. The being standing in front of her is not the Yoon Gap she knew. But Yeori does not ask. She does not confirm. She waits. The still knows its own weakness, which makes it vulnerable to collapsing on its own. It's not about itself. The steel is smiling in the trailer, indicating the emotion of how it perceives itself. In front of Yeori, for the first time, it smiles genuinely. But behind that smile, confusion is lurking. Gangcheol is now feeling a crack between Yoon Gap's emotions and his own purpose. Yeori is no longer a shaman. She is becoming a mirror for Gangcheol. She shines a light on him, even without asking or saying anything. And the king is watching all of it. At the end of the trailer, the king does not call out Yoon Gap's name. He commands with silence and looks into Yoon Gap's eyes. That silence is speaking. I know that you are not Yoon Gap. In episode 3, Yeori's intuition, Gangcheol's emotions, and the king's judgment will all start to move simultaneously. The palace is no longer a safe for Gangcheol, and Yeori will no longer avoid it. She makes a resolution. With her own hands she vows to protect Yoon Gap's soul, and she declares that she will stop the steel that is trying to engulf that soul. Episode 3 might be the delicate story and the steel, stained with human emotions, first collide as they reject their fate. Until now, it was a war happening inside Yoon Gap's body. Now, a war begins between Yeori and Gangcheol. Fate. This is no longer a story of possession. This is a real battle between memory and emotion, between gods and humans. The still that awakened within Yoon Gap believed it ruled over humans, but in fact, it was being ruled by emotions. Yeori's gaze changed, and the king's silence became sharper. Now, no longer hide. In the next episode, the emotions between Yeori and Steel may shaking the entire palace. Who, indeed, is the real Steel? The answer is in episode 3. The real story of Gung starts now.